Okay, I see that smile on your face. Love it.
I got all emotional watching that intro.
Oh, well, thank you. We're glad. That's saying that you like it and you may love it. So we're happy about that.
Yep.
Thank you. Davina, welcome to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. It is an honor to have you. And we just want to start off and say thank you for coming to share your testimony of escaping from a cult and more. So as we do it, we want our guests to introduce themselves. And then, as you know, City C going to come and kick off the first question. And then we're going to go back and forth.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Davina Kecun. I'm 47 years young, and I was brought up and raised as a Jehovah's Witness, which is a questionable religious organization. It's the more I heal from it, the more I realize how deep and complex the wounding was, and it's been a journey. So I was brought up and raised in that structure, in that religion, believing that they believe that they're like the true religion and there's no other one, and everyone who isn't in that religion is going to be destroyed. And I escaped, or I left when I was 28. And it's been a journey, because that was when I realized that I was the subconscious patterning was really deep, and it's really held me back in a lot of my life, and I've been healing from that and supporting myself to heal from that for 15, 16, 17 years. I'm also a mum. I'm married. I'm a mum. I've got 3 daughters, and part of my healing is to support and help them so that they haven't got that underlying patterning that a lot of us have got from growing up just in the world in general. I want a better life for them, and undoing my patterns is a big part of that, to support and help them. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here with us, all the way from the UK. Thank you so much again. Now we do like to, with all of our guests, get into the very beginning, and see if we can draw lines and patterns and parallels from childhood till now. So tell us a little bit about your childhood. How'd you grow up? Your family structure. And when kind of was your first taste of trauma?
Yeah, very young, actually. So I was the very much wanted daughter of an older parents, as in they were 40, which was quite old in 1977. The doctor, when my mum went in and found out she was pregnant, the doctor was like really apologetic. And my mum was like, no, we want this baby. So they did very much want a baby. But my mum, because having become a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, she had been raised Catholic. There's certain ways of behaviour that are expected from young people, from toddlers, babies, and I was not a conforming toddler. So I was physically punished, not beaten in the way that many are, but traumatically enough for it to be like I'd be dragged out of their church meetings crying to be given a spanking. And also one of my strongest childhood memories was actually being left to cry it out. I would have been having discussed it with my oldest sister, I was around the age of 2. So quite old, actually, to be left to cry it out. Most people who leave babies to cry it out do it much younger. But I have these vivid memories. I was old enough to talk because I was crying and shouting from my bed, I'm lonely, I'm lonely, I'm lonely. And that was quite impactful trauma that followed me through. So that's aside from the aspects of the cult side of things. I also had this trauma around being not good enough, not well behaved enough, a naughty little girl. It led to self-harm later on in life. So I was just like, that was just part of normal life for me. I told a lie, and then you learn how to hide stuff and how to behave a particular way so that you're a good girl. But I was still never good enough. And certainly then, as I'd sit and listen to the religious meetings that I was in, because there's no like Sunday school in Jehovah's Witnesses. The children are in the meetings, whatever's being said, whether they're talking about Bible stories of people being killed, whether they're talking about God destroying all the people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses anymore, or not Jehovah's Witnesses at all. If you leave, you're worse than the people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, because you knew that God was going to destroy you, so you're even worse. And if you speak out about them, like every time I make a video where I speak out about them, I hold my breath and wait for backlash, because my dad is still a Jehovah's Witness. He's 88, he's old and registered blind. But there's always a little part of me that's worried that he'll actually get wind of what his daughter's saying and what his daughter's doing, and decide that he's going to cut me off. And that's like, every time I speak about that is something that's very real fear that I've actually just in the last few weeks been processing, because I was aware that I was going to start speaking more about it. I've just started making some videos for my YouTube channel to support ex-cult members, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, very specific, because there's specific things within that religion that are unique to that religion, like there is with any other cult or religion that people feel they've been traumatized by. So yeah, trauma aside from the cult side, very young, it's something that I've recently also realized is my core belief in what's been like caused deep challenges in my life, for success, for creating my livelihood, for feeling like I could be successful in what I do. There's always been this underlying pattern of I'm not good enough, I'm never going to be good enough, and that's definitely something that I've been processing just recently, actually.
And I'm going to ask you this is not my question, it's just yes or no, and then we'll get into it. Do you still feel like you're not good enough?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So we're gonna get into that. So I want to jump back and ask, when you were a child, you mentioned that you weren't physically punished, but in other ways punishment. And I mentioned cry out. I never heard of cry out. So can you explain to the audience a little bit about what cry out is and how it affected you?
Yeah, it's actually I don't know if it's unique to the UK. I don't think it is. I'm fairly sure that when I had my own babies, it was something that I knew I'd never do, was leave my babies to cry. And I'm fairly sure that when I was like looking at it, and when I was on Facebook, like being a keyboard warrior about it, it was also, there were patterns within the US and other countries and Australia where it's sometimes done. So it's a method of, when you want your babies to sleep, you basically leave them till they cry themselves to sleep. And you don't go back in and comfort them. You don't pick them up. There are different ways of doing it. So it can be done where you might just go in, pick them up, put them down. You don't speak to them. You don't make eye contact. And you increase the length of time that you leave them to cry before you go in and comfort them. That's there was I think it's called controlled crying, was the parenting expert who came up with that one, called it controlled crying. And then crying it out was when you just literally put them in bed and leave them to cry. And that's done with very young babies. Babies, once they start weaning from about 6 months old, they'll do that. And it has been shown to raise cortisol levels and create trauma in babies and toddlers. And I was around the age of 2 when that was being done to me, and I remember it. And it wasn't done. The thing is that it wasn't done for very long, because my dad and I had 2 older sisters, and none of them liked listening to it. But this was what my mum had heard was going to get me to sleep, because I was having been in an older family with parents who were 40, 41, 42. And my sisters, there's a 17 and 13 year age gap between me and my 2 sisters. They're from my mum's first marriage. I was like being sent to bed while they're all being adult and grown up downstairs. And I was like, I was a sociable child, and I wanted to be center of attention, and I wanted to be in the middle of the room. And they'd send me up to bed, and they'd have friends round, and I would be like, I'm missing out, and I wouldn't sleep. And I didn't, like, I really didn't. They did that for a matter of no more than a week, according to my sister. And it never helped. It never made anything better. It never made me sleep. And I would eventually, they gave in, and I would fall asleep downstairs anytime in the evening, and my dad would carry me upstairs and put me in bed. And it never bothered me, because one of the other things that's said within parenting experts is that it will stop your babies from sleeping through the night in their own bed. But I knew that wasn't the case for me. My dad would take me up, put me in bed. I never woke up in the middle of the night and thought, where am I? What's going on? I'd continue to just sleep. I never had sleeping problems, other than, like, once I was in bed, I didn't have sleeping problems. But that followed me through life right up until I started my inner healing. I couldn't sleep alone. I had to have something to help me fall asleep, a crutch to fall asleep, a book, music. My husband, when I finally got married, like, I was like, I couldn't sleep alone. And it was because I was like, I had flashbacks as soon as I closed my eyes. I'm alone. I'm lonely. It made, like, going and staying with friends difficult. It made staying away on holiday difficult, because I didn't want people to know that I had this trauma that won't let me sleep. Yeah.
Now, what, I guess, what part did being a Jehovah's Witness actually play into that bit of trauma for you? How did it all kind of intersect?
So the story that you told right from the start is that if you've got to be a good little Jehovah's Witness boy, girl, adult even. And because I was noisy, disruptive, boisterous, loud, a little bit chaotic, I'd be made to be quiet, sit down, shut up, be quiet. And all of because that was not natural to me. And how I'm a mum, I'm like, I can see the difference in my children and where they the ones that are naturally able to sit down and be still and be quiet, and the ones that need to move around. My mum wanted me to conform to this behavior, and her knowledge as an older mum, really, and because it was quite normal in the 70s to like give kids a good hiding for just not behaving, not doing what they were told, not behaving right. That was what my mum would do. And so she would take me out of meetings and give me like a slap, and I'd cry and I'd go, don't smack me, mummy, don't smack me, mummy. She'd be taking me out. There's stories of me dragging chairs with me because I'm like clinging onto a chair because I didn't want to be smacked. And so she'd give me a good hiding, and then I'd get over crying, and then she'd take me back in, and then I've got to sit there and be quiet and be good and sit still and do what I'm told for another. And the meetings are like 2 hours. Well, they were then. Like they would have 3 meetings a week, 2 hours a time. 1 would be Sunday, 2 would be evening meetings. And that was one of the things that kind of messed with that messes with children's sleep schedule, because if you're trying to get children to sleep at a particular time in the evening, but then 2 evenings a week you're actually taking them out of the house and out of their routine, and then trying to make them go to sleep the other nights, and I'd fall asleep in the meeting and they would want me to fall asleep in the meeting, so they'd try and wake me up, and then in the evenings when I'm at home they want me to go to sleep. It was like really confusing to a little mind. And it was my mum wanting me to conform to being a good little girl, and that was then what followed me through into adulthood. Okay. I'm not a good enough little girl. I don't want to shut up, sit down and be quiet. I actually want to speak out and be loud and be energetic and create commotion in some way.
Mm-hmm. So were you the only child in the meetings, or were there other kids in the meetings?
No.
You were the only child?
No.
There was a lot of kids?
There was, well, where I grew up initially till I was about 4.5, it was quite a small congregation. I don't know the numbers exactly, but maybe there being about, thinking of those that I knew when I went back there when I was 15 to that same town, and there was about maybe half a dozen, 10 sort of between the ages of baby to like teens. And then I moved when I was 4.5 to Manchester in the UK, and that was a much bigger congregation, and there must have been 20 plus children in that congregation. There's about 100, of a congregation of about 100. So from like birth to 16, there'd be about 20 children, and that's the behaviour that's expected of all of them. And then it's dependent on the parents. Like my mum and dad wouldn't take me out of the building. They wanted me to sit in the building and be good, whereas there were other parents that would, like I had friends whose their parents would take them out into the car park and walk around with them, or take them out into like up and go out into where we were. It was like a main road, like more industrial main road type area, and they'd like take them out and just take them for a walk and then bring them back in. And it was very like, why can they do that, but I've got to sit here and be good, and if I don't sit here and be good, I get a good hiding. It's really confusing. So yeah, this was plenty of children, maybe not as many as other churches, because they didn't encourage people to have babies. It's very much you're putting God first and you're putting the message first. So having babies is distracting from that and taking your time away from it's taking your time away from God to have babies. And so they're not like the Catholics. Yeah. They're not like the Catholics who were like, don't use contraception. They were very much discouraged marriage. Like you don't really want to tie yourself down to getting married, but you also can't have sex before you get married. So there's like this underlying, where in the teenagers all want like to get married so that they can have sex, but then there's that, it's like such a confusing message. And all the time you've got this message coming in that if you leave, you're cut off, nobody will speak to you again. That's like the end of your relationship with your parents, the end of relationship with for anyone born and raised in, it's like everything is that, like everything, you're going to lose everything, and then God's going to kill you when the end of the world comes because you're not a Jehovah's Witness.
What? Okay.
I was actually going to say, could you tell us, because I excuse my ignorance and possibly some of our viewers, because the extent of my knowledge of a Jehovah's Witness is really just, annoyance, guys that ride around in short sleeve polos on bikes, playing missionary.
No. Jehovah's the ones to knock on the door.
Yes. They ride around on bikes and come knock on.
I thought that was Mormon.
Come canvas. Nah, it's like,
okay.
Okay.
There's sometimes a crossover, and they do get confused.
A little bit. and then not being able to celebrate normal holidays, and then
no holidays, no
we knew
Christmas, no
Michael
birthdays.
Jackson was a Jehovah's Witness, grew up Jehovah's Witness. But if you could tell us a little bit about the I guess the principles of being a Jehovah's Witness, how they may differ from normal, not normal, but other sectors of Christianity. Yeah. I know that's
fundamentally, like they have the good on the surface. It looks like they're telling you to be nice to people, treat people well. They would consider themselves Christian, so do what Jesus said and love your neighbor, love God and love your neighbor. There's not a lot of charitable work for people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses, so they won't go out into the community and help and support people in the community. They believe, say, most Christian doctrines in relation to the Bible teachings of creation. They don't believe in the immortal soul, so when you die, that's the end. They don't believe in the Trinity, and there's sort of various other doctrinal differences to other Christian religions, but the top and bottom of it is they think they're the true religion, or that's what they teach. They're the people within the congregations. Whether the actual high ups truly believe that nowadays, it's difficult to tell. There's so many changes. I've been out for 16, 17 years. Lots of us who've left in the last 20 years or so don't recognize it now, because they've made so many different changes to try and modernize it. It's almost like they're trying to bring people back in, probably because they're leaking people out the back quicker than they've got people getting baptized in. And yeah, it's the more their belief is that we're in the end times, that God's going to bring about the end of the world, that everything is being controlled by the devil, and so anyone who speaks against Jehovah's Witnesses is doing the work of the devil, and that is, so there's that fear of the devil in there, and then the fear of being destroyed by God when you leave, or if you're not. So anyone who's got people loved ones who are still not Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're then being constantly hearing God's going to destroy your family who are not Jehovah's Witnesses if you don't make them convert and change. So that's then when people leave, that's some of the fear that the people are left behind. That I know that's what my dad thinks, is that I'm going to be destroyed, and that is there then things that he will then say to me is I don't want you to be destroyed. Really you think your God is that vindictive that he's going to destroy me when I'm 140 miles away and doing everything that I can to help you and support you, even though because you're my dad and I love you, he still thinks God's going to destroy me.
Okay. Well, I want to ask really quick, because I want to jump into how because we talk about escaping from a cult and why you considered it a cult, and I guess the effects that it had on you.
So I didn't think it was a cult for a long time. I guess I've got to bring my husband in here, because I've been with my husband since I was 17, not married to him since I was 17. We met when I was just after I was 16, I think. And he asked me out when I was 17, just before I was 18. And because of his upbringing, also as a Jehovah's Witness, but with some other like cultural differences, he was always more skeptical, I guess. And when we were in our late 20s, he started hearing stuff about the founders of Jehovah's Witnesses in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And he brought this to me and was like, you know, there's some things here, they're said to be connected to the Freemasons, and that's where their foundations came from. And there was quite a few at the end of the 19th century. There was a few different Christian sects set up, people who didn't want to be Protestant or Catholic or be part of those religions anymore. And he brought this to me and was like, I think, you know, there might be something wrong with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was like, I was really in it. Like I was a good little Jehovah's Witness. I was knocking on doors. I was spending like 90 hours a month preaching to people. I never converted anyone. I am very proud of the fact I never converted anyone. And I was like, you can't say things like that. That makes you an apostate if you say things like that. And that's the worst of the worst. The people who leave who then speak against it, they're the worst of the worst. They're the apostates. They are the ones who were literally doomed to die. And he then went down this path of exploring like the stories that were out there about these things. And in 2013, I think it would be 14 maybe, there was a big child sex abuse case in Australia, and he watched this, and it traumatized a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, because it really brought to the fore that there is this underlying child sex abuse going on within and covered up by Jehovah's Witnesses, the higher ups in the religion. And he brought this to me again in 2013, 14, and I was like, no, like I don't want to hear it. I didn't consider myself one. I didn't want to be one. I'd been hurt by them because of the way they treated him and I as an unmarried couple. And he followed it. He spoke about it. He'd play these ex-Jehovah's Witness videos and be like, turn them off. I don't like, they're horrible, horrible people. And I think at about 2015, I started to hear some of the stuff myself and take it on board and be like, oh, wow, yeah, there's a lot in this. I was struggling emotionally and mentally. My mental health was at its worst. I'd got a 2-year-old and then 2 older daughters as well. My daughters now are 15, 13 and 9. And I was like at breaking point, and I spoke to a few people and they were like, oh, you need to start meditating. And I was like, I can't meditate because that's like letting the devil in. And they were like, well, you know, you need to do something to help yourself, like with your mental health. And I did. I started looking into meditation, and that showed me that a lot of the things that they'd said were actually helpful and supportive. So the things they'd said were demonic, from the devil, would allow you open to dark forces and allow the demons in, were actually really supportive of people. And I started meditating, and surprisingly, the demons didn't come in, and found that really helpful. And as I started to do that, I started to research a little bit more about their doctrines and began to realize for myself that what they were teaching about the soul, about God, about the devil was all being misrepresented, and about control and power and manipulation. And that was when I realized that was where my trauma, the roots of my trauma were from, because I was just waiting for God to destroy me, because I'd left and I didn't want to go back. And then I didn't want to go. There was like no way I was going back into something that's covering up child sexual abuse. There's no way I'm going back into that. And yeah, that was about 2018. I made the decision that I considered myself definitely not associated with them. And I started to do some shamanic healing. I started to look at what would be considered like everything now that they teach me was from the devil. I started to look into, so I did like I did a course. It was a shamanic course, but it was called Way of the Wild Witch. And of course, witches were definitely not a thing that you get involved with. And it was much more about like natural healing, the rhythm cycles of nature, the planet. We followed like the wheel of the year, the seasons, and did some creating of natural medicines, healing things during the course of this year. And that really opened me up to like alternative spirituality and not religious dogma. And that was the turning point for my mental health.
And ideally, since there was so much on the line for your soul, quote unquote, once you are a Jehovah's Witness, what does the conversion process look like? Somebody going to Islam might read their Shahada. Is it like a moment? Is it something, is it actually like an event when you do convert, or is it, just pretty normal?
They consider themselves Bible students, so they consider themselves to deeply study the Bible, but it's their translation and their version of the Bible, and that can be quite different to other translations and versions of the Bible. Like I said, they don't believe in certain like well-known and well-taught Christian doctrines like the Trinity and the immortal soul. So they study their version of the Bible, and there's like this repetitive nature to how they teach, which is the brainwashing element now. Now I'm aware of it. You can see how there's like they tell you the same things and repeat it every time you're there at a meeting 3 times a week, or two times a week now. They're telling you like this is our way is the right way, and if you don't follow it, then you're not going to be saved by God. And they'll teach that like we're in the end times because they've like allegedly looked at prophecies that are pointing to this time as being when God's going to bring the end of the world. Christ, the returning of Christ, which they don't believe is like in a physical form, but is him coming. And that's like the world's falling apart now because the devil's got control of it. So they like claim they study the Bible, and that's what they'll do. They'll like study their books. And then the big point really is that they don't want people to look outside of their books and outside of their literature and outside of their translation of the Bible to research other religions. We'll research it all for you. You don't need to look. So people are very wary of ever looking at other translations of the Bible. And other like parts of the Bible. I think other spiritual texts, if it's not part of the canon of the Bible that was set up in the like 3 something or other AD, 359 AD or something like that, then any of the books that go further back than that, like the books that are not in the canon of the Bible, which are the books that fascinate me, or other spiritual texts from other parts of the world, like if they contradict what they've said is the truth, then they don't want to know. And even though like most of there's like, I think my husband was saying the other day that most of there's more people on the planet believe in reincarnation than don't. But that if you went and turned around and said, oh, I found evidence in these scripts, like spiritual texts that go back like thousands of years that prove that what you're teaching is wrong, they'd say, no, that's wrong. Like all these spiritual texts that they found, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, they thought that was wonderful initially, but when the Dead Sea Scrolls started to prove their Bible wrong, they didn't want to know, and they tend to cover up anything, and you don't want to go and read any literature that's been written by anyone who's left. You're not encouraged to go and read. So yeah, it's like study our books, don't look anywhere else.
Okay, so it's keep it here. There's nothing else here. So when you begin to separate you and your husband, what are some of the challenges that you faced with starting to make the move to say I'm detaching?
So I said we met when I was 17. Well, we got together when I was 17, but we didn't get married till I was 31. And given that you're not allowed to have sex before you get married, which we had done, and we had been like, they call it reproved for doing. We'd like gone and confessed that we'd done this, and you get like reproved and marked within the congregation. Everyone knows what you've done, but like nobody talks about it. And what had happened was my husband, he'd not wanted to get married to me because of this idea of when you get married, you're actually married forever, pretty much. And he'd got these stories within his own parents of them not having had a particularly happy marriage, and it was because they were Jehovah's Witnesses and couldn't separate because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, because divorce is not something that's accepted unless there's infidelity. And we were together like as a couple but not living together, and in circumstances within our lives ended up where the best option was for us to live together. And the moment we knew that we were going to move in together, we knew that we couldn't stay Jehovah's Witnesses. He'd already stopped going to any meetings. He'd already sort of like separated himself. And there's like different ways people leave. The least painful way is to just stop attending and sort of like cut ties slowly. So people just, you're not there at the meetings anymore and nobody really notices. Or you can go and tell the elders that you've done something really bad and then get disfellowshipped or get like cut off, get excommunicated type of thing. So we moved in together and we lived together. It must have been like 3 or 4 months before I told my mum and dad and was like, Chris and I have had to move in together. It's the only viable solution. Now, my mum and dad, whilst they were Jehovah's Witnesses, were like, well, are you getting married? And we're like, yeah, we've actually got engaged now. We're going to get married. And they're like, right, well, we can't really support that you're living together, but if you're going to get married, we'll accept that. My husband's parents, on the other hand, were like, you what? I think we were much longer telling them. I think we might have told them in the like couple of months before we actually got married. And they basically, because of that, they wouldn't come to our wedding. His dad feels like his position in, because he's an elder, that's like what they call their ministers within the congregation, he felt that was much more important than his son. My dad wasn't an elder. He had been, but he'd stepped down for health reasons. And my mum and dad came to our wedding, but his mum and dad didn't. So he's quite estranged from his mum and dad, and that causes some sort of painful issues, because he's constantly trying to reach out to them, but they're only interested in reaching out to him when they think that they can try and bring him back. And then we got married, and it was basically because of their pressure on people to get married, they'd actually caused us to delay that union. And as we separated from the organization, from the religion, we were able to connect more ourselves with what brought us together, like the things that we liked together, the things that we enjoyed together. And separating from the religion made it like, it was this weird thing of like, we felt closer together, but there was this underlying current of you're rejecting the truth, you're rejecting, like, you're risking being destroyed. And it's something that I think both of us had to face, sort of separately and together, but also know that it allowed us to find ourselves without the dogma and the indoctrination of who we were performing to be for them. We were both performing to be good little Christians, good little Jehovah's Witnesses, whilst actually not really aligning with their messaging, and feeling like lost and confused.
I did want to ask, just because when you mentioned the age difference, it made me think about it. Now, with your older siblings, from your mother's previous marriage, how did they, if they at all, acclimated in the whole Jehovah's Witness thing? Do you recall any kind of static from there, or them being old enough to recognize such of a
my mum converted when they were about maybe 4 and 8. She converted, I think she was still married when she converted. She converted because, or maybe they just separated. Her husband left her because of different things with one of my sisters had disabilities, health conditions. She had spina bifida, and that was too much for him, and he left. And my mum had fell out with the Catholic Church, and she converted, and they were quite young, and they just accepted this change in their life. And that was how, like, she met my dad, and they were quite happy as Jehovah's Witnesses. My one of my sisters, my sister who had the health problems, passed away a couple of years ago, and she was still very much in the religion, even though she could see, as many of them can, they can see like flaws and issues with the religion, but there's this idea that God's going to sort them out and God's going to like fix things, and so you've got to stay in and wait for God to fix it. My other sister doesn't really isn't active within the religion anymore. And they really, it's difficult to say because they were on their own path and were on their own journey. They converted happily to it. And that is like that. One of the things they do is they get children, they get vulnerable people and children. So yeah, my mum now my mum, he had just left her and that my mum was vulnerable. And this is one of the things that they do. They like play on the vulnerable. People who've just lost somebody, people who've separated and split up from partners, and bring this like, oh, we'll be your family now type of thing. But they're only your family, like conditionally. There's this conditionality about it that there's not, it's as long as you're doing what we say, we'll stand by you and we'll support you. But if you leave, then we don't want to know you. And that it plays havoc on people's mental and emotional health.
Wow. I want to ask, because you talked about putting 90 hours, you said a week in for
a month.
A month. Okay, so 90 hours a month and going to door and door. Did that affect you in any kind of way? Did you feel obligated that you had to do that, or forced that you had to go door to door?
I mean, it's voluntary. It's voluntary, which basically means they don't pay you.
But do you feel as though you had an option? Was it required?
It's sort of like it's how you show that you're a good little witness. If you're either doing that, or for the men, they're like seeking to be servants within the congregation, to be like able to get up on the platform and speak publicly. That's there, because women don't speak publicly. Oh yeah, women don't speak publicly. Women can't teach or speak publicly. We can go and knock on doors, but we can't speak to the congregation. We're not we're not allowed to teach men. So therefore we're not allowed to stand in front of the congregation and teach men. So the men want to strive to be, that's how they show that they're good Jehovah's Witnesses. And the women, to show that you're like that you're giving your all to God, you want to be a pioneer, particularly when you've left school. So you're not encouraged to further education. You're not encouraged to go and learn like academically. Most are dissuaded from, here in the UK anyway, we're dissuaded from college, sixth form, we're dissuaded from university and further education. And what you're encouraged to do is go and be, what they call it, pioneering. And that is like spend, it's not as much as that now. They have like dropped the number of hours that they expect you to do. But when I was doing it, it was 90. It was 1,000 hours a year, which averaged out at about 90 hours a month. If you did 90 hours a month, you could have 2 or 3 weeks off in the year where you didn't have to be spending hours and hours knocking on doors. And that was then, again, it was going on the streets, it was knocking on doors of every house, all weathers, all year round, and facing like what people were saying on the other side of the door, like what how they were reacting. And it was just like, if you didn't, it wasn't an obligation, but it was how you felt like you were being a good Jehovah's Witness, was to go and do that. If you were doing that, then you were doing the best that you could. So I'm doing that and like still not feeling good enough, still feeling like I'm not good enough. I'm doing this time. It basically burnt me out, because it's not It's just not. Now, as an energy healer and as an empath, and I also teach and know human design, it basically wasn't right for my physical or energetic body, and I would be exhausted, so then I'd not manage to make the hour requirement, and then I'd feel like I'd failed all the time, not being paid for it. So then I'm doing something part-time as well. I did cleaning, I did care work, I did shop work, and still not feeling like I was good enough because I couldn't meet this 90-hour requirement. So it was just like this, like, I'm still not good enough. And it's, yeah. Yeah.
I can definitely understand. Now I do want to, for time's sake, do want to know, what was that kind of defining moment, in the creation of Indigo Sky Holistic? How did that come about? And where did you kind of pull the idea from that, or for that?
Yeah. So in 2019, so I started working on my mental health around 2016, 17. I was at breaking point. And after I'd done this shamanic stuff in 2018, in 2019, I started looking at more holistic ways to support my mental and emotional health. And I was also growing a business. I had a handmade Etsy shop and handmade business at the time. And I wanted to grow that and expand that and make that successful. And I came across some energy clearing, emotional clearing, to try and find out what my blocks are to why I can't have a successful business. And when I was doing that, one of the things that we were called to do was like really go into parts of our past and our lives that we felt were holding us back. And I did, when I did this like emotional clearing stuff, I was doing it with a group of people, with a therapist and a group of people, a coach, therapist, and there was about 8 of us in this group. And I actually did, on one of the Zoom calls that we did, for the first time since leaving, I actually sat in this Zoom room with these 8 people and said, I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that is where my trauma comes from. And this is the first time I've ever said this. You're the first people here that I've ever told that I was raised as Jehovah's Witness. The shame of admitting that because of what the world thinks of Jehovah's Witnesses, the annoying people who knock on your door. I'd like never told anyone. I'd had friends, I'd met people, I'd known loads of people in the time that I'd left up to that point that I never said I was a Jehovah's Witness to. So it was a massive step forward in my healing. And as we did this emotional clearing and some business coaching, the coach was like saying to me, like, do you really think this handmade business is like what you're supposed to be doing? And I was already doing some holistic therapy courses. And I went, I don't really know. Like, I like my aromatherapy and the crystal healing I'm doing. And she said, could you bring them together? Like the knitting and crocheting that you do, could you bring them together? And I went, no, that's not possible. And I went away and I thought about it. And these like ideas started to come to me of like how I could bring the work together. I never did. It never materialized into anything. And I actually, by the start of 2020, I closed my handmade business down and launched as a holistic therapist. But obviously 2020 was a bit chaotic and things didn't quite go to plan. I couldn't do any of the things face to face that I had been training to do. But that was then when I discovered, like, as I uncovered all these patterns and did visualizations and meditations and the shamanic work that I've been doing, I realized that all through my life I'd been drawn to healing. I'd worked in healthcare for 10 years. When I was little, I always was really intrigued by hospitals. I got a bit of a hospital phobia, but if it came to being on what's the ins and outs of health and wellness, I was really interested. When I worked in healthcare, I worked in trauma, like the trauma wards, high dependency units and trauma units where people came in with car accidents and stuff like that. That side of things really was really interesting to me. But I didn't want to go back to healthcare because I feel that it doesn't consider the whole person, and it certainly doesn't consider emotional health, which I think is, like, from my own experience, emotional health is the key to health and wellness. And I launched my holistic therapies. I then wanted to explore all the things I've been told that I shouldn't. So energy healing, energy, spirituality, astrology, all those things that I've been told I wasn't supposed to do, I really wanted to dive into. And so I did my Reiki levels 1 and 2 in 2021 with another ex-Jehovah's Witness, because I felt like I wanted that one-to-one contact with somebody, and I felt like he'd understand my hesitation to connecting to the energy to do the healing. And then in last year, 2023, I did my Reiki Master and energy healing. Like I love it. I love that side of things. I love being able to feel the energy that comes from people. I'm very, very open to other people's energy, which means I have to constantly clear my own energy so that I'm not susceptible to it and taking it and holding it in, because this is what I realized as well, was that I'd been storing a lot of emotion and a lot of energy from other people, and that's super easy to do. So I have to constantly release and let that go. And then realizing that people need support with their emotional health first and foremost, and that PTSD and complex PTSD are not very well supported by mainstream medicine, but there's a ways to support using energy healing that can be really powerful. But how do you get people to know, come and I'll hold my hands over you and you'll feel a relief and a difference from your trauma? Is like, people don't get that. People don't get that. It's feel like it's part of my purpose on earth, is to help people see how, when you open up your energy system and are open to allowing somebody else to support you to open your energy up, that you can actually find this release from trauma. And the really simple way that I like, my favorite way to do that in a gentle way that's not quite as weird as my standing holding my hands over someone or connecting in and doing like a meditation to do distance healing type thing, is EFT, emotional freedom technique. And so I that's what is on a lot of my YouTube channel, as a lot of EFT content I've got. That's what I've been focusing on creating recently, is EFT videos. And then just this month I've started doing EFT videos specifically for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, because we have these unique conditionings and these unique stories that we've been told, like God's going to destroy us because we're not. That's some deep shit to try and release, is like the belief that's subconsciously held, even if people have think they've forgotten it. It's subconsciously being held in the subconscious mind and in the energy body, this idea that you're not a Jehovah's Witness anymore, God's going to destroy you. So I'm creating these EFTs to support people with their with the being shunned, being rejected by family, and it's like feels like a really powerful thing that I can give back to other people who've been there, because it's changed my life to be so free mentally that I'm able to call myself a psychic when in the past that would have made me like people would say that I'm opening myself up to the devil, but I can call myself a psychic now and not feel like I'm going to be struck down by God.
Mm-hmm. And I have we're at time, so I have really quick just to close it out. I just wanted to know, and I'm gonna ask a 2-question and one. I wanted to know, you said you didn't feel like you were good enough, and I guess you're at a place to start getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm going to mix it with my closeout question. What are some ways, why did you feel like you weren't that good, and Sid's going to close out? And then what are some ways that helped you feel like that you are good enough for starting that journey, that you're good enough?
Yeah. So yeah, I recently got down to that being my core belief as to why I've still had repeating patterns in my life showing up of feeling unsupported by the people around me. And I'm constantly doing the inner work. I'm constantly journaling, like, why are these things showing up, and going into the core beliefs of why we have repeating patterns going on in our lives. It's usually because there's an underlying childhood, usually trauma, and it is like it's going back right to the very first time probably that I felt like I was being punished for not being good enough. What was your closeout question?
Just tell us a little bit about now how you do feel.
Yeah.
You know, that you,
Yeah.
Or yes, or
So-
yes, some ways that, how do you feel
Yeah.
in some ways that have gotten you, just maybe one thing that has gotten you where you are now that helped you start the journey to help?
EFT and Neville Goddard. So I recently came across Neville Goddard, and because he goes through the Bible, it's helped me to decondition that side of things, that it's to reprogram. I needed something that discussed the Bible without the dogma of the Bible, and uncovering that core belief of I'm not good enough, it means then that I can reprogram ways that I am good enough. So I'm looking for ways in my life now that show that I am good enough. Every time someone says something to me now in a comment, or like in a message, I'll screenshot it to show like that people think you are good enough. And I'm particularly when I'm going to sleep, I'm like visualizing or remembering or going over in my head like all the reasons why I'm good enough and what I'm good at and how I'm supporting people. So yeah.
Awesome. And just to close everything out, we do like to call this part shameless plug. So you do see your banner scrolling across the bottom here. Please let our viewers know how they can contact you, utilize your services.
Yep.
Anything you'd like to draw traffic to, any merch you have for sale,
Yep.
anything, the floor is yours.
Yep. My website, you can find my website, indigoskyholistic.com. On there, you'll find everything that I do. I am actually starting a 6-month deep self-nurturing process in September called Rest, Surrender, Trust, which is everything that I've learned in the last 6 or 7 years brought into a 6-month nurturing process to learn that the answers are within us, but we have to learn to trust ourselves. And that can, for anybody, whether you've been raised in a cult or just raised in a strict upbringing or just raised in the world in general, learning to trust yourself is the key to changing your whole life. So if you feel like you're not good enough, you feel like you're struggling to be seen or heard, if you're a mum, particularly with a lot of mums, we give a lot of ourselves and neglect our needs. So it's all about nurturing yourself and supporting yourself to trust and surrender. So yeah. And they're all on my website.
Thank you. Thank you so much, because there are so many people in the factor where religion drives the mind as a brainwash, and those a lot of folks follow because of what is said. So, it's an honor that you're speaking out about something that affected you mentally, that coming up in you were forced to be a part, and how it captured your mind, but it made you feel less than as an individual, which mentally affects us through life. So,
I think
mhm.
the important
Go
thing
ahead.
to know is that you can always break free. If you really think that you are stuck and not good enough, you can always break. There's always a way to break free. There is support out there that's the right for you, whatever it is. You can break free.
And we appreciate that, because this is a hard topic to talk about, because a lot of folks do not want to talk about religion, or they're not even open to talk about religion. And I know we didn't capture everything, because there's a lot more with your PTSD and a lot of things that it caused, but we're just thankful that you were able to come on and share your testimony and be supportive to our platform to continue to share life experiences, in hopes that someone will connect to start the journey to healing. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.
Yes, my pleasure. And it's midnight. It's 1 o'clock.
It is 1 a.m. here. Yeah.
Yeah. So we definitely we want to thank you for just supporting us. Period, because this is big for Sid and I, just to get folks to realize that you can start the journey to healing, and there are ways to start the journey to healing. So with that being said, we want to thank everyone for tuning in to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. We're going to continue to share life experiences. Ain't that right, Sid?
That's right.
And thank you for tuning in. We will see you soon.